The most dangerous loss in a person's life is not poverty, nor failure, nor even being lost. The most dangerous loss in a person's life is to live their whole life without knowing whom they are speaking to. Imagine that the greatest chapter in the Qur'an is not just a supplication, but a direct conversation between you and God. A conversation that is repeated in every unit of prayer and in every prayer throughout your life. That is why it was not given just one name, but many names due to its great significance. Al-Fatiha, the 7 oft repeated verses, the mother of the book and the healer, as mentioned in the hadith of the teacher of goodness to people, peace be upon him, in Sahih al-Bukhari. It is the 7 oft repeated verses and the great Qur'an, which I have been given. But the more important question is, why did God make the greatest chapter in the Qur'an a conversation? The greatest conversation in the universe is found in a magnificent divine hadith narrated by Abu Huraira in Sahih Muslim from the Prophet, peace be upon him, that God said, I have divided the prayer between myself and my servant into 2 halves, and for my servant is what he asks. So when the servant says, praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds, God says, my servant has praised me. And when he says, the most gracious, the most merciful, God says, my servant has extolled me. And when the servant says, master of the day of judgment, God says, my servant has glorified me. And when he says, you alone we worship and you alone we ask for help, God says, this is between me and my servant. And for my servant is what he asks. Then when he says, guide us to the straight path, God says, this is for my servant, and for my servant is what he asks. Imagine the scene, my dear. You recite 7 verses, and God responds to you verse by verse. It is not just recitation, but a conversation with God. For this reason, the author of In the Shade of the Qur'an said that Al-Fatiha is not just the opening of the Qur'an, but rather a declaration of the relationship between the servant and his Lord. The surah begins by establishing the greatest knowledge in life. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds. Imam al-Tabari mentioned that Lord means the owner, the manager, and the nurturer of his creation, meaning that the universe is not just a random existence, but is under complete divine management. Then come the 2 verses, the most merciful, the most compassionate master of the day of judgment. Mercy, then reckoning. For this reason, the author of In the Shade of the Qur'an says that faith builds a person between 2 wings, hope for mercy and fear of reckoning. Here, Al-Nubani points out that the Qur'an creates stability through this balance, for if a person lives only by mercy, he becomes negligent, and if he lives only by fear, he collapses. But if he lives between the 2, he becomes upright. After you come to know who Allah is, the most critical moment in the surah arrives. You alone we worship and you alone we ask for help. Ibn Kathir mentioned that the word you alone, iyaka, indicates exclusivity, meaning we worship none but you. However, here a profound analysis emerges from Abdul Rahman Habanaka al-Maidani. Servitude to Allah is not a restriction on a person, but rather a liberation from all other forms of servitude. For in this life, a person does not live without servitude. He either worships money, power, people, or his own desires, but when he worships Allah, he is freed from all of that. Then comes the second phrase, and you alone we ask for help, meaning that a person does not proceed by his own strength alone. Al-Nubani says, faith does not build a person who is deluded by his own strength. Rather, it builds a person who recognizes his weakness before God. And this awareness is the true source of strength. After knowing God and knowing yourself, comes the question that determines the fate of your entire life. Guide us to the straight path. Ibn Kathir mentioned that guidance includes knowing the truth, acting upon it, and remaining steadfast in it. And that is why Al-Fatiha is repeated in every unit and every prayer. Al-Nubani also points out that misguidance does not usually come as a sudden reversal. but rather through small deviations that accumulate over time. Then the Quran precisely defines the path of those you have blessed, the path of the prophets, the righteous, and the truthful. Then, my dear, comes the final warning, not of those who have incurred your wrath, nor of those who have gone astray. Ibn Kathir mentioned that those who have incurred wrath are those who knew the truth and abandoned it, while those who have gone astray are those who were misguided out of ignorance. Abdul Rahman Habanaka al-Maidani says that every deviation in history falls into one of these two paths: corruption of will or corruption of knowledge. Why is it called Ash-Shafi'ah, the healer? Al-Fatiha was not called Ash-Shafi'ah, the healer, without reason. Rather, it is because its meaning is so profound that the companions recognized its power even before they knew its ruling. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri narrated in Sahih al-Bukhari that a group of companions stopped at a tribe and the chief of the tribe was stung by a scorpion. So some of them asked, "Is there anyone among you who can perform ruqya, spiritual healing?" One of the companions stood up and recited Surah Al-Fatihah over him, and the man was cured, as if nothing had happened to him. When they returned to the Prophet, peace be upon him, he said, "And how did you know it is a ruqya, spiritual cure?" Reflect on this statement, my dear friend. The companion did not know that it was a ruqya, but he understood its greatness from its meaning, and so healing came. That is why the scholars called it Ash-Shafi'ah, the healer. So Surah Al-Fatiha is not just a short chapter. Rather, it is the greatest lesson that is repeated in a Muslim's life. It teaches you three things: knowing the commander, the commanded, and knowing the path. But before all of that, it teaches you something even more profound, that in every prayer you are not just reciting words, but you are entering into a direct conversation with Allah. That is why Al-Fatiha was not just the beginning of the Qur'an, but the beginning of the entire path. Peace.